Hello, everyone, and welcome to Locus in Conversation. I'm Liza Tromby. I'm the editor-in-chief and publisher of Locus Magazine, and we're all so pleased you could make it here today. Today's conversation, the metaverse, augmented reality, and virtual reality, versions of these once science fictional ideas are actively being introduced into our world today. From tactical augmented reality used by the military to Snapchat filters and Pokemon Go's invisible invasion into our world, augmented reality is already in our phones and by extension in our lives. And it's long been in our fiction. Neil Stephenson's Metaverse appeared in his 1992 novel Snow Crash with great fanfare, and many would say we're moving closer and closer to that in real life. So let's see what today's science fiction minds think about it. I'm excited to introduce our speakers, two of my favorite authors, smart, award-winning creators, Daniel Abraham and Aliette de Bodard. Daniel is a New York Times bestselling author and screenwriter who's published 30 books, including The Long Price Quartet, The Dagger and the Coin, The Black Sun's Daughter, and possibly best known as half of the writing duo that is James S. A. Corey, creator of the Expanse series with co-author Ty Franck. His fiction has won Hugo Awards, Locus, International Horror Guild, and Dragon Awards. He's been nominated for the Nebula and the World Fantasy Awards, and he's sold over 8 million copies of his fiction worldwide. Aliette de Bodard lives and works in Paris. She's won 3 Nebula Awards, an Ignite Award, and a Locus Award, and a British Fantasy Award, and 6 British Science Fiction Awards. She's the author of A Fire Born of Exile, of Charms, Ghosts, and Grievances. She also wrote Fireheart Tiger in 2021, a sapphic romantic fantasy inspired by pre-colonial Vietnam. And her space opera books include The Tea Master and The Detective. Hi, guys. Introduction's done. It's so good to have you here. Aliette, thank you for staying up late for us in Paris. I hope everyone is doing well. Are we good? Yeah? Okay, excellent. So sorry?
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to hand off the stage to you two. But I will be back at the end to wrap this up to our audience. If you have questions for Aliette and Daniel, please put them in the comments. If you start it with the word question, it'll be easiest for us to spot, and we'll make sure that they see it. Okay, guys. I will exit stage left and leave this to you.
Just waiting for the... Okay, there yours. She said she was going to exit. I thought I should wait until she left. So I don't know about you, but when I was looking at this, I was looking at augmented reality, virtual reality, metaverse, all of that, and the thing that struck me was that they're all kind of new versions of how to mediate our experience of the world through computers, through the internet, even more than we are already doing as we sit here in New Mexico and Paris, talking in front of audience of people who we can't see. So it seems like it's on a spectrum. What's your basic take on that? What's your response to that idea as a?
I guess maybe we should. Maybe I'm going to cover what like AR, VR, and Metaverse stands for, especially Metaverse, which is a little like I'm a little unsure what is involved there. I confess.
Define our terms. That can't be right. Okay, no, that's a good idea.
Sorry, I'm an engineer. That's what we do before handling a client anything. So augmented reality is basically having extra, it's like Pokemon Go, having extra layers on top of physical. I'm gonna call it the physical reality for want of a better word, right?
Some overlay to your senses, something that's already so you're seeing the real world, but
virtual reality actually substitutes for your senses. So this is, I guess the prototype is Second Life, but it's not what I would call immersive in the sense that you're just moving around on a computer screen. But that would be a kind of basic immersion, and then it can get more complex. And I have no clue what the metaverse is supposed to be. I think it was supposed to be that weird video where people with weird body features were chatting. So let's go with that. Is it Threads or Facebook? Or
my understanding of the metaverse, the idea of the metaverse, is kind of if augmented reality is dealing with your immediate physical environment with footnotes, and virtual reality is creating a different sensorium, a different space that you're moving through, something that's volumetric. The metaverse is the thing that extends that into a social interaction, where you're in an invented space and interacting with other people somehow.
Yeah, I guess to me that was already a kind of, but I guess like when you say virtual reality, my first thought was Second Life, where you already have pretty much a lot of those components already. But okay, fair.
Yeah, my experience with virtual reality has actually not been mostly social.
Okay, fair.
The case uses that I've played with have been either video gaming that was, and I'm only a one player guy. I'm not a or technical somehow.
Yeah. I work in the railway industry, and we use virtual reality in order for people to visit the inside of trains, right?
We used it on the Expanse as a way for directors and the lighting guys to come in and look at the sets before we built the sets and start planning their shots before, so they had a little extra lead time.
Okay,
so that, I mean, those are the definitions I came in with.
Fair.
But there's also other stuff going on. There's like, have you seen the virtual real estate thing?
I haven't, no.
So there are folks who are putting together mappings of the world and letting you buy spaces on their server, on their model, so that you could control the actual physical space that Paris is in and build your own city there. I'm not sure exactly what the advantages of doing that. I don't understand the
I don't understand how it correlates to the overall internet architecture, but
it feels
seems a little odd.
It feels a little NFT-ish to me. There's a little vibe there for me.
Yes, and now that NFTs are apparently all worthless or something, which is the article that Facebook handed to me this morning when I woke up.
Well, I'm shocked.
Okay, yes. Really shocking.
I get the feeling we're both a little skeptical about this. What are the uses of this technology that you've seen that are actually useful?
Well, I'm going to start. Yeah, I'm going to start with the obvious one, right? Because we are in a pandemic, and there was an explosion of Zoom, and you had an explosion of so not just talking with people on the screen, but also generated background behind people, that sort of thing, so that you wouldn't actually have to deal with 3 running children behind people while having a professional meeting, say, for instance, or that sort of thing. And certainly I did find that very much interesting, because I don't know how I know in the US it varied state by state, right? But in Paris we had this pretty strict lockdown that lasted for all of 6 weeks. And so for 6 weeks it was kind of like you could go out 1 hour per day. So the rest of the time it was basically like lifelines on Zoom and stuff. And it does weird, like you were talking about mediating perceptions. I think it does weird things, in particular to perception of space and perception of other people in space, right? When I first came out of lockdown, everybody was too close, too loud, too much, right? And Zoom had a mute button. I could just turn them off when I wanted to.
And so, yeah, I agree. I think that the pandemic was a really interesting use case for mediated conversations, mediated social interactions. And I understand some use cases for augmented reality, too. I mean, but I also understand I have an instinctive fear of putting Facebook in my glasses, so I can't go through the store without having commentary and distraction coming in.
Well, I guess comes down to who owns the technology and what they're going to do with it. And currently, you have such a lot of the internet that is running on, like, commercials, ads, people trying to sell you something. Scroll down on Instagram and like you get all those. Imagine all the weird stuff that you get on Instagram that is not the people that you follow, but like the promoted videos, and imagine that following you around in virtual reality.
Even for me, the even if it wasn't sponsored content, the ability to distract myself constantly with with people I know, even with content that I've signed up for. I think there's an interesting thing that happens to consciousness when you're in an attention economy that kind of privileges distraction that way. And this seems like this is like aiming at the last little bit of private space that I still have for myself. So I recoil.
Yeah. No, I think it's actually interesting how our perceptions of like attention and attention spans and occupation of that space have evolved, and not necessarily for the better. Under capitalism, it's like never have an idle moment kind of thing. And there is that move towards every hour in the day must be filled with something, and every square mile or square whatever volume of thing must be filled by something, right?
Well, and then here we are, still working in prose. We look old fashioned.
You're looking old fashioned, but you are using Word to like fuse comments together and a bunch of things that are actually using some pretty complex algorithmics there.
Fair.
And more reliably than some of the other stuff. OpenAI, I am looking at you.
We'll get there. I have great faith. What are the things that you see AR and VR being useful for, especially as a storyteller?
Oh, I was going to come up with examples that had nothing to do with storytelling. But,
let's start with those. We'll move over.
Well, I think there's a lot of interest in like being able to go to places and occupy places that are either real or fictional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like visit a flat or a city without actually going to it could have a lot of interest. And then there's all the sorts of different spaces that you could create to meet up with friends or to meet up with people, or just because you need peace and quiet somewhere and you're off to the beach, virtual or something. And then probably way more creative things, but I'm fairly pedestrian when it comes to applications of those things. I guess it's like I work in the computer industry, and I'm like very well aware of like how much work it is for a computer to do things reliably without crashing on you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've got some of that same experience.
I did 10 years of frontline tech support back in the early days of the internet, so yeah, I'm jaded coming in.
Yes, exactly how people can make computer do things.
Or it did something, and then why did it do that? It's because turn it off, turn it back on, call me, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, but I mean, as a creator, some of the stuff that I can imagine as well is you mentioned using the VR to create the sets for the Expanse, right? Imagine you could do that for your book, right?
I can't imagine I could do that I can't imagine what that would be like. I mean, I have so much. I mean, and this is just my process. Other people can do other stuff, but the amount of time that I spend doing world building now, just with worlds in my imagination and kind of picturing it in my head, I can't imagine how many more hours I could spend, actually going in and doing the AutoCAD stuff and building the cities.
Yeah, no, I don't think I had. I mean, I don't think I'd had the patience for that. But I guess it would be interesting for if you want to do promotional stuff, trailers, or like visit houses and stuff. Like,
So
I was thinking maybe you could use it to map a ship, but then the sheer amount of work that would involve to just like, do the
and
room like sort of makes me feel.
well, and correct. Let me know what you think about this. But my experience of writing, as a storyteller, is that a lot of what our job is finding the evocative moment, the evocative description, and leaving a certain amount of space for the reader's imagination to fill it in.
Yeah, well, I can see some uses for AR though, like when you have a character and you're looking up the character and trying to find all those stupid details, like they got their hands wounded in like the last scene, and where is that wound? That's a sort of like giant mind map overlay of like, okay, he's 36 and the last place he went to was Mars before, or something. Like I use that in the book, in the Red Station Drifting. I use a variant of that where people instantly knew the way that they were related to each other in the family, which is something that's always stumped me. So, sort of it with wish fulfillment, which is okay, this is the correct Vietnamese pronoun I should be using for this person. But I think it can also be useful in the context of a book, especially if it's a large book, especially if, it's a series and you need to remember what the hell happened. But then you'd have to actually populate it, right?
Yeah, you have to like fill out the wiki to.
Yeah, how the hell are you doing your own? You'd need to maintain the wiki, right? That's a lot of work.
So tell me more about how you've used this technology in your work. You say you did one where it was tracking familial relations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a series. Hi, I brought my books.
So did I. Yeah.
Yeah, The Red Scholar's Wake and the Fire Born of Exile, which is set in the Suye universe, which is a Vietnamese-inspired space opera. And one of the premises of this is that creating virtual space is easy, and creating augmented reality is also easy. So people will basically, like on the fly, create a virtual space for other people to join. They can, if given permission by their system administrator, they can also alter perceptions. Like they can make the room seem bigger in virtual space than it really is, or smaller than it really is. There are some areas where this isn't allowed because security reasons and so on. So I imagine there would be some kind of like system administration. Sorry, I'm a tech. I'm like, what are ways that we could abuse this to blow up the entire space station? Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting when I was writing it actually is, so I had this idea that you had the physical reality and then people would like stack overlays on top of them, and everybody would have their own personalized overlays. So it ranged from, you can pick your own clothes, right? I could have like a pattern of like shifting dragons on my clothes if I wanted to. I could change my face or change my entire body shape, but I could also change the space around me locally. So if I don't want to hear the people in the booth next to me talking when I'm in a restaurant, we can change that as well. And if I want a privacy filter, that means that nobody else can hear what me and my friends are saying. We can also do that. And so it was really interesting. Like none of it is like wildly innovative in terms of technology. I think it'd be really hard to pull off practically because, it would like flounder in a lot of places. So I was like, you know what? It never actually crashes. There are never any bugs. Nobody ever goes to see the sysadmin in the middle of the night and goes, all our servers have crashed. But it was really interesting to imagine the thing that I found most fascinating, I think, was to imagine that for those people, the physical reality wouldn't be as important as it is now, right? It would be just part of a continuum of spaces that they inhabited. It's like, okay, it's like one space to like another. But if you can at any moment step into a virtual world, then the physical world isn't that important.
Yeah, which is part of why I find the whole project a little suspect. But I hear what you're saying.
I mean, this is not a moral judgment value. This is just I think it would happen like that. Would I like to live in this society is a whole different. Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions that came through from folks who were signed up early. Let me grab one of these because that seems like it's a good segue. Will the craft of writing, this person asks, evolve to be done in AR, VR environments that allow the writer to virtually create the worlds and characters they're writing about, and enable writers to singularly create and distribute their stories on all available media platforms. So that's a lot of question that's built into that. And I think it goes to some questions about, for me, the broadening and of requirements of an artist and the kind of addition of specializations. I was talking before about how I am skeptical about my ability to become a good graphic designer and a good VR artist and a good sound designer and all of the things that it seems like that would need, much less a publisher. And I know that a lot of folks do in self-pub right now that I have nothing but respect for that, because I know how much work publishing is. But the idea of having that level of control also means to me having that level of responsibility as an artist.
Well, I mean, I wonder if it wouldn't change the medium in which we write, right? I was thinking, as you were talking, remember, that makes it sound like they're old, but they're still around, and you still find really good ones like hypertext stories, right? So something like that, but in AR or in VR. And so I don't know if that's straight up a new medium, or if you could adapt a book the same way that you adapt a book into a film. Could you adapt a book into,
a VR experience
or
AR
VR
experience?
experience or something like that? And that would involve obviously like more people and more expertise than the simple writer, but that would be a different way of doing art, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, it would, and yeah, it would. I feel like it would have to be, for me, a group project. I think I would need to have somebody who was an expert in these other things, which is kind of what it's like doing like a TV show or a comic book, where you have, the artists and the actors and the directors and all of these other people. So I think that the more we start moving into a place where we're using AR and VR, or we're setting our work in a metaverse theater or whatever that would be, the less we're doing it singularly, and the more we're relying on the expertise and the efforts of others.
Yeah, no, agreed. Same as, having an audiobook requires narration, and
or having a regular one requires a copy editor. I mean, God help us if we don't have somebody checking our spelling.
Oh God, yes. Well, and someone to do the cover, an editor to actually, come and say, did you really do that? Did you really think that was a good idea? That sort of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, yes, I thought so at the time. I regret it now. Here's another one we've got. How would you recommend a novice to AR/VR approach adding these devices to a story without looking like a total noob? Like, as if you've incorporated this in. What tips do you have for folks coming in? I only have one, and it's just a pet peeve. It's not even a tip. It's just there's a kind of convenient trope that comes into a lot of these things, where you're going into the metaverse, you're going into the game, but if you die in the game, you die in real life. I don't know how that works, and I don't think that always just feels like,
I don't actually think that works unless somebody's done really weird connections to your vitals when you are not looking.
And it seems like a terrible choice in game design. It's just, I don't know why, even if a programmer could do that.
From an engineer and a programmer point of view, a lot of like those dystopic or like, Black Mirror-ish kind of things are just terrible design choices. I'm like, my average experience when I'm considering a user is basically, sorry, end user, is that they will come up with crap, right? I have to be resistant with whatever crap they come up with. So, you don't want to leave them the design choices that lead to them dying, because they will do it.
No, and
it's
so
a little bit like DMing, your party is necessarily going to go towards the big trap, right? That's what
Yeah,
it's going
no,
to be.
whatever the worst idea is, that's what they're doing.
Exactly.
So
Same. Sorry, end users. I know some of you are very nice, but I also have to prove to my safety engineer that when you are not nice, it will still behave.
and I guess that generalizes out to when you're putting this into fiction, when you're putting this into a new world that you're making as a storyteller, there's a feedback loop that happens when you base it on previous stories as opposed to actual experience. Anybody who's played on a PS5 knows that when their character dies, they don't die. If you're basing it in that experience instead of the cheap movies from the 70s where we were saying, oh, we need to have stakes,
Twilight Zone, yes.
That's the stuff that I think if there was one hint I would give to folks coming in, it's base it in your experience of the mediated realities we already inhabit, instead of the literature of the mediated realities. Because I feel like we've done a lot to miseducate people about
I feel like you should document yourself on like how the technology actually works today, right? In order not to come up with things that sound totally silly because we thought of them and didn't work out, that sort of thing. I also think that just as the average user doesn't have any idea what's under the hood of their cars and never has a reason to look under the hood of their cars unless it starts smoking in the middle of somewhere, most people are not going to know the details of like how the AR or VR works. It's just going to be there, right? You don't wonder what kind of servers Facebook runs off. It just runs, right? Until somebody's locked out of the building or something catastrophic. But even then, you're not going to be the person dealing with that. The sysadmin and everybody on like crisis team is going to be the ones reacting. I think like some of the interesting things I try to think of when I put technology like that in stories is who has access, like how widely distributed is it? Is it like a newfangled thing that's super expensive? Is it something that's restricted to only the military because security reasons in the game or something? If it is only restricted to the military, how long before it percolates down to more civilian applications? Who can afford it?
Famously, William Gibson said the street finds its own uses. When you start looking at like military applications of AR and VR and even of a metaverse like space, I think part of what our job is to think, okay, well, if that actually happened, how would people use it besides for what it was designed for?
And the other thing I was going to say was absolutely that, which is like, is there a use to which it can be put that is not the main use? And if the answer is yes, people will use it that way. And so it's kind of like, if something can be done with it and you don't do it in the story, you're going to have to come up with a really good reason why it's not being done, right?
Right.
And not rules. People are very good at going around the rules if enough is at stake. It has to be something else. And also then in terms of, the other thing is in terms of impact, right? What kind of impact does that have on the daily texture of society? What kind of impact, like just think about the place social media has in our life currently and the way that it has changed our relationships with people, and the fact that we can have relationship with people who are in very distant places much more easily than we used to, right? And so that's the kind of thing that you have to kind of unspool. I tend to think of it as a kind of like giant tangle of yarn that you sort of like need to follow to several ends in terms of like how it will impact different segments of society. And how will people incorporate that into their daily routines and their lives?
And do we have to get it right? I mean, that's always the thing that I worry about. I know I'm not gonna. I
didn't think so. I think as long as you don't say anything like, I did say like look it up so that you don't say anything potentially stupid, right? But like the truth is like it would have to be really stupid. I mean, even as a reader, I'm like, hey, it's fiction, right? it just has to not terminally break my suspension of disbelief, and you might have a lot of other things going on that keep me busy enough to not question what's going on, right?
So
The silence in Star Wars makes no sense whatsoever.
If we skate fast enough over the thin ice, we'll be okay.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, the lightsabers are cool. Is anybody asking why the lightsabers work, or like why they're a terrible weapon to have in combat? No, they're cool, and that's fair, right?
So if it's sufficiently awesome, if our version of the metaverse, if our version of virtual reality use is just awesome enough, then
awesome enough, interesting enough, if you have enough plot, whatever. I think of it as, whatever will hold the reader's attention, and obviously that's very idiosyncratic to the reader, but like there are a few common points.
Hi. I feel very big now. I feel like I'm going to be cutting off a conversation that's rolling along here. So I don't know if you had another question from the.
I had a couple more. I've got a really got one that we've kind of talked about before. That said, Gardner Dozois was said to believe the job of a science fiction writer is to notice a car in the movie theater and to anticipate the drive-in, then go on to predict the sexual revolution. What do panelists believe are the equivalent steps in the AR, VR, and the metaverse? We could take a swing at that. I will say I worked with Gardner back in the day, and I don't know that I agree with him, but
I mean, don't get me wrong. I worked with Gardner, and I respect him a great deal. I just don't agree with him on that particular thing, because I don't think our job is to predict the future. That would be my job as an engineer, to predict the next 3 to 5 years in order to like do some technological watch and stuff. That might be somebody else's job doing working in research science for the next 10 to 20 years, right? And then beyond that, who knows? And they'll get it wrong.
We always get it wrong. We always
Did anybody think when we made up Facebook that we were going to have to deal with cyber harassment, cyberbullying, and people twatting other people? Nah,
we didn't. But boy, we should have. I mean,
we definitely should have. But
I will say, I think that's less an education about technology for me than an education about human nature and exactly how little the organism has changed.
Well, I feel, if we're talking about the sexual revolution and that kind of thing, then that puts us squarely into the kind of behavior with the technology rather than the technology itself.
Yeah.
Which is what I find most interesting. I mean, also tragic in some areas, but as a writer, those are the things that I'm most interested in, right? Not so much the technology as the impact it's having on people.
Right. Well, and for me, I think the thing that's really interesting for me is there's a way in which what we do is a VR without tech. We're doing VR entirely through prose. We're saying, okay, just close your eyes and imagine this palace and this castle and listen to this bird that I'm describing and create this within your imagination in ways that generate the kind of false memories and experiences that VR delivers, pre-made. I mean, it
really depends on VR as well, right? You can make a case for like it's not always going to be perfectly realistic. I don't know. This
my imagination isn't always perfectly realistic. I get things wrong all the time. And then there was one last one, and I will run this through. This one's a long one. It says, with Gemini's launch slated for December and the full multimodal functionalities predicted for GPT-5, one might contemplate the potential synergy of fusing diffusion models through their mixture of experts strategy amalgamated with the current transformer module. How might such augmented, perhaps exponentially amplified AI capacities reshape AR/VR horizons? Extending this projection further, what are the implications when language models assimilate elements of embodied intelligence?
Am I allowed to go on the rant against generative language models now, or is that not?
Should. I think this is the time. That was your opening. That was take it.
I am not sending a generative language model into space, because whenever you send anything into space, you want it to be absolutely robust, absolutely foolproof. And the definition of a large-scale language model is that basically it hallucinates, right? The way those things work is they come up with the most likely word in the next string of word. They're like your when you're writing a text and your phone predicts the next word that you're gonna write based on a previous text and the corpus. That's what they do, except at a larger scale. So first off, when you ask them a question, they'll come up with a hallucination, and if it wasn't in that database, they'll invent stuff, and it sounds vaguely plausible. Think of it as the ultimate in mansplaining, except it's done by a computer. It's like somebody who, with absolute certainty that they're getting it right, and absolutely no way to course correct, right? So I think
no, that's yes.
I wasn't going to say in their current state, but I think it's a flaw of the model itself, right? If you want to have any kind of so I've worked in like guidance technologies and stuff that weren't used in space, but that were used in aeronautics. And there are ways to manage random variables and stuff. This is not that. And there's a reason why it's being applied to text and to images, because your brain's doing half the work. Your brain is going like, hey, it looks vaguely human shaped, it must be human, right? Mm-hmm. Your rocket going through space is not going to appreciate when it starts hallucinating about the value of G. It's going to explode.
And thank you so much for saying the truth. I am also one of the three people who is deeply unimpressed by large language models, and I think there's probably some interesting things you can do. It's very specific use cases, but not the stuff we're talking about.
I definitely think. I find them impressive, right? I just feel like calling them AI is a stretch.
Ted Chiang calls them applied statistics. I really liked that. I thought that was a great.
Right. He also had a line where he called it a fuzzy JPEG of the entire.
The fuzzy JPEG was best. Yeah, the fuzzy JPEG was there.
Yeah. Applied statistics is my favorite term for it. That's the.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like, okay, well, here's the next word. Most of the time, sometimes. I don't know.
So I have a question about, like, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but about. I think you were talking, Aliette, about in your book about how like they move in and out of real life, and like I know like they talk about Gen Z. I have 14-year-old and 16-year-olds, and like they really don't distinguish between digital lives and physical lives. Like when we were locked down, and I would say, I really want you to like talk to your real friends, and they'd be like, these are my real friends, and I'm like, you've never met them, and you've talked to them for like a cumulative 9.2 hours. Like these aren't the same things as the people you went to school with, but they really don't distinguish between the way that certainly I do as a 50-something, when I think about my real life and then what I do online. And I wonder if you would say, like, what is the next generation? I hate to ask you to predict, but like, what is the like extrapolation of that? Of there's no difference for me between being in Minecraft and talking to my friends and being out on the street playing with my friends. Like, what's the next thing that they go to? Like, is there we're just online, we're just in a virtual state, and we stop having in real life interactions? Because the pandemic pushed us that direction a little bit, The
pandemic pushed us that generation, and then the nature of the organism pushed back.
Right.
We're also seeing a lot of depression, a lot of isolation, a lot of kind of the cognitive effects of limiting what our lived experience is. We're built to be multisensory. We're built to be moving through a genuine environment. We're built to smell things. We're built to touch things. And when you narrow that down, I think we suffer for it.
I would slightly amend that, which is that, like thinking, for instance, about disabled and neurodivergent people, we're not all built the same way to process the same inputs in the same way, right? So there are some people, for instance, for whom like just having text is much easier because you don't get overwhelmed by information.
Absolutely.
That sort of thing.
And absolutely, there are always use cases and places where it is useful. I don't need to minimize that at all, but as the death of offline experience, I don't see that happening.
No. Well, that's good. I mean, you sort of worry about it like that, just that trend, like as having kids that I have to like pull to get them out of the house and back out into the real world. You know, you worry about that. I did have one answer for your question about, or the audience question about using these AR and VR in books. Is there's like a lot of people have done it, and there's a million examples. But I think recently Saad Hossein and Cybermage did a really good job of mixing plot that ran both in a sort of virtual world and in the real world. And so if somebody was looking for a way to do that, that might be a good place to. But go read people who are doing it, because that's like we learn by reading, right? So okay, we have a few more minutes here. Do you guys have a like last thing you want to touch on, or I don't think we have any additional questions.
You know, I will say I think I'm excited by the places that AR and VR, less the metaverse, but AR and VR specifically can find their use cases that really apply, and I hope we don't spend too much time trying to drill screws with a hammer. We're using the wrong tool.
Yeah, I just hope we don't go the large language model ways.
Right. No, I mean, it certainly hasn't proven itself out right now. I do think there were some early release issues and things.
There's some interesting edge cases, shall we say.
There are some interesting. I've seen some interesting stuff, like specifically using it to try to figure out like animal languages. But by and large, I'm with Aliette. I think it's there's a flaw at the conceptual level with that one.
Well, I mean, I think it. I mean, you know, I was having a chat though with a friend, so it was more towards like stable diffusion and like the art models, right? And I was talking with a friend who worked in video games, and they use a lot of concept art, right? And they said it's like ethically and practically it's rubbish at actually producing concept art, right? But one way in which they could see it work was, for instance, doing textures automatically, that sort of thing, and try and speed up some of the stuff that some artists, you know, some artists love roofs, obviously, but some artists might find it a little cumbersome or whatever. Or you could come up with some like more like augments, right, than trying to like replace people kind of thing. And that's the way I kind of imagine in the best of worlds AR and VR going in a sort of like enriching the experience rather than changing it drastically for the worse.
And I think ultimately we will get to a place where the things that are useful remain useful, and the things that are crap fall the way of NFTs.
Hopefully, as I said, you know, not impressed by the whole large model stuff.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that we are pretty much at time here. Thank you guys so much for coming and doing this. It's wonderful to see you. Awesome to listen to your conversation. I hope we can do this again. Thank you to the viewers for coming. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. If you are watching and you want to sign up for our newsletter, hear about future things like this, please do that. It'll be in the YouTube notes. And thank you guys. It's good to see you. I'll see you soon, I hope.
Be seeing you.